Suspected my husband was planning a divorce, so I quietly moved my assets. 2 weeks later, he learned the hard way that betrayal cuts both ways. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lena Cross. I'm 34, an interior designer living in Oregon. My husband, Evan, runs a small construction company. For most of our marriage, things felt solid. We built our home together, worked long hours, and dreamed about opening a joint business someday. But a few months ago, something changed. Evan started coming home late, saying he was meeting clients. His phone was always face down, and his laughter on those late-night calls didn't sound like the man I married. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Everyone goes through rough patches, right? But then one evening, while I was cleaning his office, I heard him on the phone. He didn't know I was standing by the door. He said words that froze me in place. Split things clean, get the papers ready, and she won't see it coming. My heart pounded so hard I thought he'd hear it through the wall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and realized my marriage might already be over. I just hadn't been told yet. I wanted to confront him, to scream and demand the truth, but something inside me told me to stay quiet. If he was planning to end things and take everything we built, I needed to protect myself first. The next morning, while he showered, I checked our joint accounts. Large withdrawals had been made, ones I didn't recognize. I opened my laptop and started a list of every shared asset. Our savings, investments, property, even the design equipment I'd bought for my business. I felt numb but determined. I called a lawyer that my friend Ria recommended. She was calm, professional, and told me something that stuck. Don't let emotion lead. Just prepare. So that's what I did. I opened a separate account in my name and began transferring my own earnings there, slowly, in small amounts so he wouldn't notice. At home, I played the role of the loving wife. I smiled, cooked dinner, and asked about his day, even when his answers were short and distracted. Every fake smile felt like swallowing glass, but I stayed patient. A few days later, Evan started changing passwords on our shared devices. He thought I didn't notice. That's when I knew he was hiding something big. I didn't cry anymore. I just worked quietly, protecting every dollar and every piece of proof I could find. By the end of that week, I wasn't the same woman who cried into her pillow. I was someone ready to fight back, silently and smart. He thought he was preparing to leave me. What he didn't know was that I'd already started walking away first. I kept pretending everything was normal. Every evening, I made dinner like always, his favorite meals, the ones I used to make when we were happy. I asked about his day, smiled at his short answers, and acted like nothing was wrong. It was strange how easy lying became when you knew someone was already lying to you first. Little things began to stand out. He wore a new cologne, one I'd never seen, in our bathroom cabinet. It smelled expensive, strong, unfamiliar. He started dressing differently too. New shirts, better shoes, clothes that didn't look like his usual work gear. When he spoke to me, his tone had changed. He was polite, but detached, like someone talking to a stranger at a coffee shop. Ria, my closest friend, noticed something was off when I stopped laughing during our usual weekend calls. She works as a nurse and has this way of seeing through people. When I told her what was happening, she said, "Don't let your heart talk louder than your head." I knew she was right. I had spent too many nights hoping he would snap out of whatever this was. Hope wasn't a plan. I met with my lawyer again. She told me to keep track of everything: expenses, receipts, bank statements, even casual remarks he made. Paper trails don't lie, she said. So I began writing things down, keeping copies of every document I could find. I turned into my own quiet detective, collecting proof without showing fear. At home, the tension was thick enough to choke on. He barely looked at me anymore. The small touches, the casual jokes, the shared moments, they all vanished. Our dinners became silent routines. Sometimes he would sit across from me, scrolling on his phone while I pushed food around my plate, pretending not to care. But I noticed every movement, every pause, every glance toward his phone that lasted a second too long. I kept my calm. I had to. While he moved away from me emotionally, I was moving my life out from under him, piece by piece. Every paycheck I earned went into a new private account under my name. I made sure the transfers were small, nothing to raise suspicion. It felt like building a secret escape route, one quiet deposit at a time. Some nights I sat in the living room after he fell asleep, staring at the man I thought I knew. His face looked peaceful in the dim light, but all I could think about was the lies behind it. The house felt colder, the walls thinner, as if they knew what was coming before I did. I kept my mask on, day after day, playing the part of a calm wife while everything inside me shifted. He thought I was waiting for him to leave, but I was already preparing to survive without him. One afternoon, while organizing receipts for tax season, I noticed a charge that didn't belong. It was on Evan's company account, a boutique hotel downtown, a place meant for anniversaries and secret meetings, not business. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the air leave my chest. But I didn't slam the laptop or call him out. Instead, I closed the page, poured myself a coffee, and acted as though nothing had happened. That night, when he came home late smelling faintly of that same cologne, I smiled and asked if he wanted dinner. My voice didn't shake. He said he'd already eaten, gave a quick kiss on the cheek, and disappeared into the shower. I watched him go, every movement feeling like a lie rehearsed to perfection. The next morning, I called a private investigator. His name was Miles Dyer, a quiet man who spoke like someone who'd seen too much. I told him everything, every suspicion, every inconsistency the hotel charged. He didn't ask for drama, just details. Within a day, he was on it. The wait was unbearable. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt both dread and hope. When Miles finally called, his voice was calm, professional. "I've got what you need," he said. An hour later, an email arrived. I opened it and saw the pictures. Evan wasn't alone. He was walking out of that same hotel, hand in hand with a woman I recognized immediately, Harper. The name hit like a punch. Harper was an intern I had once mentored at my own design studio. She was young, ambitious, and used to ask me about how to balance love and career. I had trusted her, helped her get her first client. Seeing her with him, my husband, made my stomach twist. It wasn't just cheating. It was betrayal layered deep, cutting through work, friendship, and home all at once. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just sat there, staring at the photos, every second stretching like hours. There was no doubt left, no illusion to cling to. The man I'd built a life with had replaced me with someone I once guided, and he did it without hesitation. That night, after he fell asleep beside me, I went to my office. The house was quiet, only the hum of the computer filling the air. I opened every shared design file, every project folder we had built together, and one by one, I deleted them. Every blueprint, every layout, every plan tied to him gone. My work was my soul, and he had used it as a bridge to her. I wasn't leaving him with a piece of it. When the final file disappeared, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark, watching the screen fade to black. The house felt colder than ever, but for the first time, my mind was clear. I didn't need proof anymore. I had it, and now I had control. Knowing the truth didn't break me, it steadied me. From that moment on, I decided he would never see a single crack in my face. Every morning, I greeted him with the same gentle smile, kissed his cheek, and asked if he wanted coffee. He didn't notice that my eyes no longer searched for love, only information. While he believed I was still the wife who trusted him, I began to quietly trace his steps. I checked the company invoices, looked through the shared folders he thought I'd forgotten, and read every business statement that came in the mail. Hidden between ordinary expenses were strange transfers. Funds moved to a name I hadn't seen before. Harper. He was shifting assets to her, using her as a cover. The discovery made my pulse slow, not race. It was confirmation of everything I'd suspected. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was preparing to erase me financially. Every dollar he moved was a message. When he left, he wanted me with nothing. I didn't confront him. That would have ruined everything. Instead, I played the part he expected. I made dinner, asked about his clients, even complimented his work. He relaxed around me again, thinking his act was holding. Sometimes he'd look at me like a man who'd already won, and I'd smile back, letting him believe it. At night, after he fell asleep, I copied files from his laptop onto a flash drive. Invoices, contracts, email drafts, anything that tied those transfers to Harper's name. My hands shook, but my mind stayed clear. Each new document felt like a step closer to freedom, proof of the betrayal he thought I'd never see. One afternoon, I sat in my car outside his office and watched as Harper. They didn't notice me, and I didn't move. I wasn't there for confrontation. I was there to understand the rhythm of their deceit, the timing, the trust, the arrogance. It all had to look effortless, so when the time came, neither of them would sense what was coming. I went home that evening and cooked his favorite dinner. He complimented it, said I'd been glowing lately. I nearly laughed. My glow wasn't happiness, it was clarity. He thought he was leading the game, but I'd already changed the rules. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again, handing over the copied documents. She studied them carefully, then looked at me with a small nod. "Keep pretending," she said. "The more confident he feels, the harder he'll fall." So I did. I stayed patient, calm, loving on the surface, while every smile became a weapon, every soft word a distraction. I wasn't planning to stop him anymore. I was going to let him finish building his escape, and when he stepped into it, he'd find it locked from the inside. 2 weeks passed like a slow rehearsal for a play I no longer believed in. Evan began behaving differently, overly gentle, suddenly attentive. He brought home a bunch of tulips one evening, said he thought of me when he saw them at the market. I thanked him with a quiet smile, arranging them in a vase on the counter, pretending I didn't notice how forced his voice sounded. He asked about my day, listened just long enough to look convincing, then drifted back to checking his phone. His gestures kept coming in small waves. One morning, he made coffee for both of us, something he hadn't done in months. Another night, he sat beside me on the couch, placed his hand on mine, and said, "We've both been busy lately. Maybe we should talk soon." The words were soft, rehearsed, careful. I understood what they meant. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was trying to make his exit look clean. I played my part, calm and polite. Inside, I already knew how the next act would end. By then, all my finances were protected. Every dollar that was mine was safe in the account he didn't know existed. My design work had been secured under my name alone. My lawyer had copies of every record, every message, every signature tying him to the transfers. I had nothing left to lose, and that was my strength. He began leaving earlier for meetings, returning with that same hollow cheerfulness. It was almost sad to watch, the way he thought charm could erase the truth. I never mentioned the flowers again, never questioned his late nights. My silence made him uneasy. He started searching my face when he spoke, as if he could find guilt there. But I gave him nothing. Then, one evening after dinner, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled like a man carrying good intentions. "Lena," he began, eyes steady but shallow, "I think we need a break. Some space to figure things out." I didn't flinch. I just set my fork down, looked at him, and nodded. "If that's what you need." My tone was even, my gaze unbroken. The lack of emotion caught him off guard. He blinked, searching for a reaction that wasn't there. "You're okay with that?" he asked, uncertain now. I gave a small shrug. "I've been thinking the same thing." It was the truth, though not in the way he assumed. He looked relieved, almost smug, believing I had finally accepted what he wanted. He couldn't see that I'd already stepped away weeks ago, silently closing every door behind him. As he went upstairs to pack an overnight bag, I cleared the plates and rinsed the tulip's vase. Their petals had begun to wilt, curling at the edges. I watched the water swirl down the sink and felt nothing at all. He thought he was taking control, but the truth was simple. He was already walking straight into my plan. The papers came on a Thursday morning, hand-delivered by a courier in a crisp suit. I thanked him, closed the door, and laid the envelope on the table. The sound of tearing paper was soft, almost gentle, like it didn't carry the end of a marriage inside. Evan had finally done it, filed for divorce. He must have imagined me breaking down, calling him, begging for a reason. But the silence that followed his move was all he got. Later that week, his lawyer contacted mine. Evan wanted his share of joint assets. He believed he still had control, that the money we'd built together was waiting for him to divide. When his lawyer explained that every account had already been moved and registered legally in my name weeks before the filing, he must have felt the floor shift beneath him. What he didn't know was that every transfer had been done by the book, every paper signed under the guidance of my attorney. He had no claim, no leverage, and no idea how it had happened without him noticing. But that was only the beginning. My lawyer filed the evidence I'd collected, the documents showing he'd been shifting business funds through Harper's name. What he'd thought was a clever disguise now looked like fraud. His company accountant was questioned, and soon the truth unraveled in neat, legal language. The same hands that had built his empire were now tearing it down, and I didn't have to lift a finger. When the investigation reached Harper, she panicked. She had joined his scheme for comfort and thrill, not for scandal. The moment she realized the financial mess he'd created could stain her record, she vanished. She left their shared apartment, blocked his number, and didn't show up to his office again. The woman he'd risked everything for disappeared faster than she had entered his life. Evan tried to reach out through mutual acquaintances, saying it was all a misunderstanding. I didn't respond. The court handled everything. His company's clients began pulling contracts when whispers of misconduct spread. Bank accounts froze while auditors combed through his records. The man who once strutted through town as a confident business owner now spent his days explaining missing funds to lawyers and investigators. I heard from Ria that he'd been seen at a diner near his old office, looking worn and pale, wearing the same jacket for days. There was no satisfaction in that image, only a quiet acknowledgement of what choices can do to a person. By the time the court session ended, the judgment was clear. I owed him nothing, and he owed plenty to the law. As I walked out of the courthouse, I passed him in the hallway. He tried to meet my eyes, searching for anger, maybe even pity. I gave him neither. The man who tried to erase me had managed to erase himself. When everything started collapsing around him, I didn't celebrate. I kept my routine steady, quiet, controlled. I woke up early, went to work, watered the plants, and let the noise of his downfall stay outside my walls. The court finalized the settlement, granting me full ownership of the house. Buying out his share felt less like victory and more like closure, taking back what I had built with my own hands. The papers were signed in silence. He didn't look up once. Not long after, I heard he'd moved into a small rental on the edge of town. A friend mentioned it smelled of damp wood and old paint. It suited him now, cheap, temporary, colorless. The home we once shared stood warm and bright, filled with the calm he had tried to take from me. News about his company spread fast. Clients pulled their projects. Suppliers stopped returning his calls. Every contract he'd once bragged about disappeared one after another. The fraud investigation had made its way into public record, and no one wanted to be associated with a man whose books couldn't be trusted. His once proud business sign came down quietly one afternoon, replaced with a "for lease" notice that flapped in the wind. Harper surfaced again, but not beside him. She was angry, loud, desperate to distance herself from the mess. She told anyone who would listen that he'd manipulated her, made her believe things that weren't true. Her voice showed up in small circles, whispering blame while trying to save her own name. Evan became the villain in her version of the story, and for once, she wasn't lying. I stayed out of all of it. No statements, no comments, not even a glance online. The best revenge was stillness, watching him drown in the consequences he poured himself into. Ria came over one evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. She sat at my kitchen counter, shaking her head as she scrolled through messages about him. "You're the calmest storm I've ever seen," she said. "Most people would have burned everything down." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was true. "I didn't destroy him," I said, pouring her another glass. "He did that himself. I just stopped cushioning his fall." The room fell quiet after that. Outside, rain began tapping gently against the windows. I watched it run down the glass, feeling an odd sense of peace. The chaos that had once filled my life now existed only in his world, not mine. I had no need for revenge anymore. It had already unfolded on its own, as naturally as gravity pulling something heavy to the ground. While he tried to rebuild from ashes, I simply turned away, content to let silence finish what words never could. It was months before I saw him again. The knock on my studio door came late in the afternoon, the sun falling through the tall windows, painting everything in gold. I knew it was him before I opened it. He stood there thinner, older somehow, his confidence gone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said my name, quiet and uncertain, like it might still belong to him. He told me he wanted to talk. I stepped aside, letting him in. He looked around at the new space, the fresh white walls, the new logo on the wall, that red veil design. My maiden name. He noticed, of course. His mouth tightened, but he didn't say anything. "I made mistakes," he began, hands trembling slightly. "I thought you stopped caring about us. I thought maybe if I started over, I'd find something better. But I was wrong." His words came out rehearsed, fragile. He wanted forgiveness, not because he deserved it, but because he couldn't stand the silence that had followed him. I listened without interrupting. His voice cracked once when he said, "I never meant to hurt you this way." He kept talking about regret, about how everything spiraled out of control. But the more he spoke, the lighter I felt, because nothing he said could change what had already been done. When he finally ran out of words, I said quietly, "You should have talked to me before you planned to erase me." My tone wasn't sharp, just steady. He looked up, startled, as if realizing for the first time that there was nothing left between us, not even anger. He tried to respond, but I was already walking toward the door. I opened it and stood aside. He hesitated, then nodded and stepped out into the fading light. I closed the door gently behind him, no slam, no goodbye. After he was gone, I stood in the middle of my studio and looked around. Everything smelled of fresh paint and clean wood. I had spent months rebuilding this place from the ground up. New furniture, new clients, new name. Lena Vale felt right. It was who I'd been before the marriage, before the betrayal, before the silence. Business had taken off faster than I expected. Clients came through referrals, drawn to the calm, focused energy I brought into every project. People said I made spaces feel peaceful. Maybe that was true. Peace had become my craft. Sometimes late at night, I'd look out the window and think about the past. Not with bitterness, but with distance. The hurt had faded into something quieter, understanding. He had built his own ruin, and I had built something better from mine. The studio lights glowed softly around me, reflecting off the glass table. I breathed in the stillness and let it stay. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished and free. It was late when the letter arrived, tucked among bills and catalogs on the counter. The envelope carried no return address, only my name printed in uneven ink. I opened it slowly, expecting something ordinary, but the words inside stopped me. Evan's construction firm had filed for bankruptcy. His assets were gone, his accounts emptied, his equipment repossessed. Even his truck, the one he used to polish every weekend, had been claimed by creditors. The man who once boasted about control had nothing left to manage. I set the letter down beside my coffee mug and stared at it for a long time. There was no thrill, no sharp satisfaction, just a quiet, steady stillness. His choices had run their course. The storm he created had finally devoured him completely. That same week, an email arrived at my studio's inbox. The sender's name made me pause, Harper. Her message was short, almost desperate. She said she admired my work, that she was looking for new opportunities, that she'd learned from her past mistakes. She didn't mention Evan, but she didn't have to. I could read the shame between the lines. She wanted help, a chance, maybe forgiveness. I read her words twice, then closed the message. There was nothing I wanted to say. She had made her choices too, and just like him, she was standing in the ruins she helped build. But ignoring her didn't feel like enough. So, the next morning, I wrote a letter of my own. Just one line, neat and centered on the page. Never build your house on stolen ground. I sealed it in an envelope, wrote her name, and dropped it into the mailbox without hesitation. No return address, no signature. The paper would speak for itself. The following days passed quietly. The world around me kept moving. New clients, new projects, new colors filling my studio. Each day felt cleaner, lighter. Somewhere out there, both of them were learning what it meant to lose everything they had taken for granted. I didn't need to witness it. Their silence was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. I thought of that letter I'd sent, how a single sentence could carry more weight than any argument ever could. It wasn't vengeance, it was truth delivered in the calmest way possible. I poured myself a glass of water, placed it on the windowsill, and looked at the reflection of my studio name shining faintly on the glass. Lena Vale, clean, untouched, unshaken. Outside, the world went on, but I stayed in that still moment, feeling the quiet settle around me. I didn't need an apology or justice or even words. The silence itself had become the ending I never knew I wanted. The days began to pass without weight. The noise that once filled my head had faded, leaving only a calm rhythm of work, quiet meals, and evening walks through the streets near my studio. I started to see the past not as something to escape from, but as something that had already dissolved behind me. There was no longer anger, no longer pain, just a clear understanding of how things had truly been all along. Betrayal had a strange way of showing the truth that comfort hides. Looking back, I realized the cracks had been there long before the affair, long before the secrets. They were small things, the half-hearted compliments, the distracted eyes, the way he spoke more about plans than feeling. I used to cover those moments with excuses, telling myself love was just changing shape. But in the end, the betrayal didn't break us. It revealed what was already gone. My life now was smaller, simpler, but it fit me perfectly. The mornings began with sunlight spilling across my drafting table, the smell of coffee, the sound of pages turning. I didn't need validation or someone else's approval to feel whole. The peace I found wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, like breathing. People who came into my studio often said the space felt calm, grounded. I smiled when they said that, because it wasn't the room, it was me. Sometimes, when I locked up at night, I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. The woman staring back looked nothing like the one who once waited for answers. Her eyes were clear, her shoulders relaxed. She didn't carry any ghosts anymore. Everything heavy had been left behind quietly, without ceremony. I thought about Evan sometimes, not with bitterness, just with a kind of distant curiosity. He had taught me something unintentionally, that control built on deceit will always collapse, no matter how carefully it's constructed. There was no satisfaction in his fall, only confirmation. What I gained wasn't revenge, but clarity. Rhea still visited on weekend, teasing me about how peaceful I'd become. "You make calm look dangerous," she joked once, sipping tea by the window. I laughed, and for the first time, it didn't sound hollow. Peace had become my rebellion, my strength. One evening, as I locked up the studio, I stood for a moment under the soft glow of the sign above the door, Lena Vale Design. The name shimmered against the dark sky, clean and untangled. I thought about the long road that led me there, every twist, every loss that turned into space for something better. And as the night settled around me, a quiet truth rose in my chest, simple and certain. Sometimes protecting your peace looks like revenge from the outside. But really, it's just survival done elegantly. Hey besties, thanks for sticking with me till the end of this wild ride. Imagine suspecting your partner's betrayal, staying calm, and turning the tables without a single scream. Sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge. If you felt that strength, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real, emotional stories like this one. See you in the next one, besties. Bye!